and we are back with another recipe video. Today we are going to be making chocolate cake without using actual chocolate. Yep, you heard that right. If you're wondering how I do that, keep watching and you'll find out. Instead of using actual chocolate for the cake, we will be using cocoa powder. Well then, isn't that technically the same thing? Not really. Both products come from the same source, however, it is processed completely differently. Why would I want to make a cake out of just cocoa powder? It is cost effective and you get to explore various flavors of cocoa powder, which I think is really interesting. So if you want to just start baking, then skip forward to the recipe. However, if you want to know more about chocolate processing, then here's a long story short. It all starts with a cacao bean, and that can actually be eaten raw with minimal processing to give you cacao powder, which is highly nutritious. Or the cacao fruit can actually be fermented, roasted, and processed into cocoa liquor. From there, you can either process it further into couverture chocolate, which is super delicious, or you can take that cocoa liquor, extract the cocoa butter out, and you get cocoa powder. So does cocoa powder actually contain cocoa butter? Yes, it does. Different manufacturers actually have different percentages of cocoa butter remaining in that cocoa powder, and yes, it does affect the texture and flavor to it depending on what you like. And of course, there is a natural processed cocoa powder and Dutch processed cocoa powder. What is the difference? A natural processed cocoa powder is just naturally as it is, which is acidic and bitter, and it's good for some application that you wish to use. Dutch processed cocoa powder is alkalized cocoa powder, which neutralizes that acidity and gives your cocoa powder a more neutral, friendly taste. Usually, what you see in stores are mostly Dutch processed cocoa powder, as people tend to like this more neutral flavor to it. And wait, there's more. So with Dutch processed cocoa powder, you can just slightly alkalize it or super alkalize it and gives you the super dark cocoa powder. One popular application of the dark cocoa powder would be an Oreo. So to wrap it up, cacao bean could be cacao powder or fermented to cocoa liquor. Cocoa liquor can then become couverture chocolate or can become cocoa powder and cocoa butter. In cocoa powder, there is a natural process and Dutch process. Alright, now that you get that, let's get baking! So in this recipe, I will be using two different cocoa powders, but both are Dutch process. If you would prefer to just use one type, that is perfectly fine. So these two are the cocoa powders I'll be using, and as you can see, there is a definite color difference. And if you've guessed it right, yes, this is the one that's super alkalized and this is slightly alkalized. Why am I using two types? Because I like the color of this as it gives it the more dark chocolate look, which makes it look super intense, and then I like this one for the flavor and this really chocolatey aroma that comes from it. But again, really, you can just use one type, such as like the store-bought cocoa powder like Hershey's, and this cake will still turn out as great.
In a clean bowl, combine all the dry ingredients together. In another bowl, combine the other cocoa powder, coffee powder, and hot water. And finally, in another bowl, combine the wet ingredients. So now you have the three bowls ready. We are ready to mix.
So what I love about this recipe is that you just have to quickly mix it and then bake it. You don't even have to use a mixer or anything. So this cake batter is based on a buttermilk recipe, but since buttermilk is not readily available in Jakarta, so I'm substituting it with yogurt. You can use all three ingredients, works just fine as a substitute. So now that I have the wet ingredients in one bowl, dry in another, and the hot cocoa mix, I'm just gonna mix it all up together. By adding hot water to the cocoa powder, it kind of enhances the chocolatey flavor even more. That's why I like to do that.
Keep whisking until there are no more lumps and then slowly pour it into the wet ingredient bowl. Keep mixing until smooth and even.
Make sure the dry ingredients are also mixed thoroughly before adding the wet ingredients. Now that's all even. I'm gonna add the wet to the dry, as it will create less of a mess than if you are pouring flour into liquid. You get? So just pour everything all at once. And I've switched out to a spatula.
Gently fold in the flour with the wet ingredients until it's evenly mixed through and there are no dry patches. This is the perfect time to get a sneaky bite of cake batter. Alright, now get your cake pan ready. I just like to use whatever I have in hand. In this video, I'm using a 22 centimeter square cake pan. Again, you can just choose whatever tray you have. You can definitely spread it thinner if you like a thinner layer. However, I do not suggest going any thicker than 3 centimeters or 1 inch, as it would take too long to bake and that could cause your cake from drying out.
So just spread the batter roughly into an even layer. Knock out any air bubbles, and this is ready for the oven. So now that the cake is in the oven, we can prepare our frosting. We will be making a custard-based buttercream. So that is cooking a custard and then whipping it up with some butter until it becomes a smooth buttercream. Since we're only using cocoa powder in this recipe, cooking it into a custard will bring out the chocolate flavor even more. So in a pot, just directly add all your ingredients for custard and we'll start cooking. I'm not tempering my eggs in this recipe because I don't really see a need to, since it's a very small amount. But if you're afraid of overcooking it, then feel free to do so. But really, you don't really have to.
Leave the butter out while we cook the custard so it can get to room temperature. Now in a pot, combine all the ingredients for the custard. Again, I'm using 2 different types of cocoa, but if you only want to use one, that is perfectly fine. Give it a good mix until there are no more lumps and start cooking at medium-high heat. I like to control the cooking by continuously whisking and taking it off the heat if I find that it is cooking way too quick, and then bringing it back to the heat and giving it a good mix again, and then doing that on and off until it becomes this thick paste. Immediately put it in the mixing bowl and start whisking. Keep whisking the custard until it is cool to touch. Once cooled, we can slowly add in our room temperature butter. Make sure it is soft, otherwise your mixer is gonna break. Just keep whipping until it becomes this light and fluffy texture. And this is the custard buttercream that we have. Oh, that texture is just perfect. Now that the cake is done, we're gonna take it out of the pan, cool it down for a bit. It's super fluffy.
So now the cake has been cooled and we have our frosting ready. We'll just need something to rotate the cake to decorate, which makes it easier, but you can just use a plate if you wish. That works completely fine. An offset spatula or a butter knife also works fine. And I'm just gonna cut my cake into circle. I prefer smaller cakes as it looks really cute. So yeah, I'm just gonna punch them out. See, this is why I like to bake on a sheet tray, because then everything's already level and I don't have to level it with another knife. Makes things super easy for me.
So these corner bits, the edges are a bit hard, so I like to just cut them out. And that gives you a very fluffy interior. Now we'll just piece them up like a puzzle as nicely as we can. See how it's a straight edge, so I just cut my cake to a straight edge as well so that it can really get in there. Now we brush it with some milk to just retain some moisture, and we can spread the frosting. Repeat this process for all the layers. Now I'm just gonna take the ring out. That was only just to get the foundation straight, and spread some buttercream on the base to maintain its structure. To finish, lightly cover the whole cake with a thin coat of buttercream and pop that in the freezer for 15 minutes. Once it's set, then we can continue finishing the outer layer, and this way it'll give you a very smooth and neat finish. Since this cake is a classic chocolate cake, I am gonna go for a simple rustic look with a clean side finish and funky edges on top.
And there you have it, chocolate cake with just using cocoa powder. I'm gonna pop this in the freezer for 15 minutes before cutting into it and devouring it. And if you like this video, give it a good like, subscribe if you have not, and I'll see you in the next one.